The fluorescent lights flicker overhead. The automatic doors have been locked for hours. The daytime shoppers are long gone, replaced by an unsettling silence that seems to grow heavier with each passing minute. You're alone in the aisles, stocking shelves while the rest of the world sleeps. But are you really alone? Welcome back to Mr. Shadow's Stories, where the darkness reveals truths that most people never want to face. I'm your host, and tonight I'm bringing you 3 absolutely terrifying true stories from overnight grocery store workers who learned that the graveyard shift can sometimes feel more like an actual graveyard. These aren't fictional tales meant to entertain. These are real experiences from real people who clocked in for what they thought would be a routine night of work, only to encounter something that would haunt them forever. Because when the sun goes down and the store goes quiet, that's when the truly strange things begin to happen. So turn off your lights, turn up your volume, and whatever you do, don't work alone tonight. Let's begin. Story 1: The Man Who Wouldn't Leave. Our first story comes from Marcus, a 23-year-old who worked overnight stock at a large grocery chain in rural Pennsylvania. Marcus had been working the overnight shift for about 8 months when this incident occurred, and he told me that he'd grown comfortable with the solitude and the rhythm of the work. Stock the shelves, organize the back room, take inventory. Simple, quiet, and the pay differential for overnight work made it worth the disrupted sleep schedule. The store closed at 11 p.m. and Marcus's shift started at midnight. There was usually a small crew, 4 or 5 people total, spread throughout the massive store. On this particular night in late October, Marcus was assigned to the canned goods aisle, the one that ran along the back wall of the store, far from the front entrance and the manager's office. Around 2:30 in the morning, Marcus heard footsteps. Now, this wasn't unusual in itself. His co-workers moved throughout the store constantly, but these footsteps sounded different. They were slow, deliberate, and they seemed to be pacing back and forth in the aisle parallel to where Marcus was working. He continued stocking, assuming it was just another employee, maybe someone who was tired and moving slowly through their work. But then the footsteps stopped, directly on the other side of the shelf from where Marcus stood. He could see through the gaps between the products on the shelves. There were shoes there, brown leather shoes, worn and scuffed, dress pants. Someone was standing there, completely still, just on the other side of the display. "Hey," Marcus called out, thinking it was maybe his supervisor checking on the stock. "You need something?" No response. The shoes didn't move. Marcus felt the first flutter of unease in his chest. He walked around the end cap to the next aisle over, expecting to find one of his co-workers. Instead, he found a man he'd never seen before. The man was older, maybe in his 60s, wearing a brown suit that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and dark, and he was staring directly at Marcus with a completely blank expression. "Sir, the store is closed. You need to leave." The man didn't respond. He didn't even blink. He just stared. Marcus backed away and immediately went to find his manager. The store had been locked for hours. The alarm system was active. There was no way someone could have gotten inside without triggering it. But when Marcus brought his manager back to the aisle, the man was gone. They searched the store, every aisle, the bathrooms, the back rooms, the loading dock. Nothing, no sign of anyone. The manager checked the security cameras, and that's when things got truly disturbing. The cameras showed Marcus working alone in the canned goods aisle. They showed him stopping, looking confused, and then walking around to the next aisle. But the cameras showed something else, too. For just a few seconds, there was a distortion in the footage, a dark shape, roughly human-sized, standing exactly where Marcus had seen the brown suit man. The shape was there for maybe 3 seconds, and then the footage returned to normal, showing an empty aisle. Marcus's manager went pale. He told Marcus to take the rest of the night off and not to mention what he'd seen to the other employees. But before Marcus left, the manager pulled him aside and said something that made his blood run cold. "You're not the first person to see him," the manager said quietly. "We've had 3 other stalkers quit because of that man. He always appears in the back aisles, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. Corporate told me not to talk about it because it makes it hard to keep overnight staff, but you deserved to know." Marcus quit the next day. He told me that no amount of extra pay was worth seeing that blank, dead-eyed stare again. And to this day, he refuses to enter a grocery store after dark.
Story 2: The Sound in the Freezer. Our second story takes us to a 24-hour supermarket in Washington State, submitted by a woman named Rachel, who worked there as an overnight stalker for nearly 2 years. Unlike the previous store, this one never closed, which meant there was always the possibility of a customer wandering through, even at 4 in the morning. But Rachel told me that the real problems never came from the customers. They came from the walk-in freezer. The freezer was located at the back of the store, past the produce section and through a set of heavy plastic strip curtains. It was massive, the size of a small warehouse, kept at a constant -10 degrees Fahrenheit. Rachel's job often required her to spend time in there, rotating stock and organizing pallets of frozen goods. She'd always hated the freezer. It was more than just the cold. There was something about the way sound behaved in there, the way the frost covered every surface, the way your breath would crystallize in front of your face. It felt isolated, cut off from the rest of the world, even though the door was never more than a few yards away. One night in January, Rachel was in the freezer, counting boxes of frozen vegetables. It was around 3 a.m., and the store was nearly empty. Maybe 1 or 2 customers are shopping, and the rest of the overnight crew is scattered throughout the building. She was alone in the freezer, or at least she thought she was. That's when she heard the crying. It was faint at first, almost lost beneath the hum of the industrial freezer units, but it was definitely there. A woman's voice, sobbing, coming from somewhere deeper in the freezer. Rachel froze, her clipboard clutched in her numb fingers. "Hello?" she called out, her voice small in the vast frozen space. The crying continued. It sounded anguished, desperate, like someone in terrible pain or grief. Rachel's instinct was to help, but something held her back. Something felt wrong about the sound. It was too distant, too echo-like, as if it wasn't coming from any specific location, but from the freezer itself. She started walking toward the sound anyway, moving past towers of frozen pizzas and ice cream, her breath coming in short, visible puffs. The crying grew louder, more desperate, and then it stopped. Complete silence. Even the hum of the freezers seemed to fade for a moment. Rachel stood there, surrounded by frost and frozen goods, her heart pounding, and then she felt it, a presence behind her, close behind her. She could feel breath on the back of her neck, impossible in a freezer this cold, but unmistakable. Warm breath. She spun around. Nothing. Just empty aisles of frozen food stretching back toward the door. Rachel ran. She didn't care about leaving her clipboard behind or about finishing her count. She burst through the plastic curtains and didn't stop until she was back in the main store, surrounded by normal temperatures and fluorescent lights. She told her supervisor what happened, and his reaction was unexpected. He sighed, rubbed his eyes, and said, "You heard it too, huh?" Apparently, Rachel wasn't the first. Over the years, multiple employees had reported hearing crying in the freezer. Some had heard voices calling their names. One stalker had sworn he saw a woman in a white dress standing at the far end of the freezer, her lips blue, her eyes empty. When he approached, she vanished. The supervisor told Rachel that the store had been built on the site of an old apartment building that had burned down in the 1980s. Several people had died in that fire, including a young mother and her child. No one could confirm if the stories were connected, but the supervisor admitted that he never entered the freezer alone, and he advised Rachel to do the same. Rachel continued working there, but she made sure to always have a partner when she needed to go into the freezer. And even then, she told me, she could sometimes still hear it, that distant, anguished crying just beneath the hum of the machines, waiting. Story 3: The Customer Who Knew Too Much. Our final story comes from David, who worked overnight stock at a grocery store in a small town in Ohio. David's store closed at midnight, and his shift ran from 12:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. It was usually peaceful work. The store was small, the crew was tight-knit, and nothing unusual ever happened, until the night of the persistent customer. It was a Thursday night, or technically Friday morning, around 1:30 a.m. David was stocking shelves in the bread aisle when he heard knocking on the front glass doors. This wasn't uncommon. Sometimes people didn't realize the store had closed and would knock, asking to be let in for just one item. The policy was always the same: apologize, tell them the store is closed, and direct them to the 24-hour location across town. David walked to the front of the store and saw a man standing outside the locked doors. He was middle-aged, wearing a dark coat, and he was staring directly at David with an intensity that immediately felt off. David approached the door but didn't unlock it. "Sorry, sir, we're closed," David said through the glass. "There's a 24-hour store about 15 minutes away on—" "I need to talk to you, David." David stopped. He hadn't been wearing a name tag. The store didn't require them for overnight staff. There was no way this man should have known his name. "How do you know my name?" David asked, his hand instinctively moving toward his phone in his pocket. The man smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was knowing, almost mocking. "I know a lot about you, David. I know you work here 5 nights a week. I know you drive a blue Honda Civic. I know you live on Maple Street in the white house with the broken porch light. I know your girlfriend's name is Sarah, and I know she works at the hospital on the day shift." David's blood turned to ice. Every detail the man mentioned was correct, completely, terrifyingly correct. "I'm calling the police," David said, pulling out his phone. "You could do that," the man said, still smiling, "but I'll be gone before they arrive, and I'll just come back another night, or maybe I'll visit your house on Maple Street, or maybe I'll stop by the hospital and say hello." David's hands were shaking now. He activated the store's panic alarm, which would alert the security company and the police, and he backed away from the doors. The man outside just stood there, watching him, that horrible smile never leaving his face. "You can't hide from me, David," the man called through the glass. David ran to the back office, where his manager was doing paperwork. Together, they watched the security monitors. The man stayed at the front doors for another 3 minutes, just standing there, staring at the cameras. And then, as casually as if he'd finished his shopping, he turned and walked away into the darkness of the parking lot. The police arrived 12 minutes later. They searched the area but found no one. David gave them a full description and told them everything the man had said. The officers took it seriously, especially the specific threats and the stalking behavior. They increased patrols around David's neighborhood and the store, and they advised David to vary his routines and consider staying with friends for a while. But here's the thing that still haunts David to this day. When the police reviewed the security footage, they found something impossible. The cameras clearly showed David approaching the front doors. They showed him stopping and appearing to have a conversation with someone. His lips were moving. He was gesturing. He was obviously reacting to someone. But the cameras showed no one outside the doors. David was having a complete, detailed conversation with empty air. The police were baffled. David's manager confirmed that he'd heard David talking to someone, though he hadn't seen the person through the glass. But the cameras from multiple angles showed absolutely nothing. No man in a dark coat, no one standing outside the doors, just David alone, talking to nothing. David couldn't explain it. He knew what he'd seen. He knew what he'd heard. The man was real.
David couldn't explain it. He knew what he'd seen. He knew what he'd heard. The man had been real. He'd known details about David's life that no one could have known unless they'd been watching him. But the evidence said otherwise. David quit 2 weeks later. He moved to a different town, changed his phone number, and according to what he told me, he's never worked overnight retail again. He still doesn't know what he encountered that night. A stalker who somehow evaded the cameras? A hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion? Or something else entirely? Something that exists in the space between the real and the impossible? He doesn't have an answer, and that, he says, is the most terrifying part of all. 3 stories, 3 overnight workers, 3 encounters that defy easy explanation. The thing about working overnight is that you're in a world that most people never see. The familiar becomes unfamiliar, the safe becomes uncertain, and the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary becomes dangerously thin. Those fluorescent lights that seem so bright and safe during the day can cast strange shadows at 3 in the morning. Those aisles that are packed with shoppers during normal hours become endless, empty corridors where anything could be waiting just around the corner. Marcus saw something that shouldn't have been there. Rachel heard sounds that had no source. David spoke to someone who may not have existed. And all 3 of them learned the same lesson. The overnight shift holds secrets that the day shift never has to face. If you work overnight, whether in a grocery store or anywhere else, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't investigate strange sounds alone. Don't dismiss your coworkers when they tell you about unusual experiences. And most importantly, remember that you're not being paid enough to become a victim in someone else's horror story. Stay safe out there in the dark hours, and remember, the shadows are always watching. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Shadow's Stories for more terrifying tales from the darkest corners of the real world. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload, and leave a comment below telling me about your own overnight experiences. Have you worked the graveyard shift? Have you seen something you can't explain? Share your story. You never know, it might be featured in a future video. Until next time, this is Mr. Shadows reminding you that some shifts last forever and some encounters never truly end. Stay scared, my friends, and I'll see you in the shadows.